Welcome to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. David, before we get rolling here, we've got something new to offer folks at the end of the year-end checklist. Would you tell everybody what that is?
Yeah, so there's, I think, 7 just quick things you might want to look at, basically, for some year-end tax planning in particular, things that you should look at doing and can literally implement this month to put yourself in a better situation going forward. So if you'd like to get that, just give us a call now or at the end of the show. We're just calling this the year-end checklist. We just created this. But it's very helpful and very useful for a lot of folks.
Roth conversions and other things, there are a few that have deadlines that have to be met by the end of the year.
Absolutely. And you know, if you're charitably inclined, there's some suggestions in there on how you can tweak your charitable giving this holiday season, et cetera.
All right, David, to the big picture we go. So what are we looking at for the next 2 years? A stalemate in Congress now? The Democrats have the Senate. The Republicans barely have the House. Maybe that works for the financial world, the stalemate?
It does, at least because corporate America at least now knows for the next basically 3 years, even though it's only a 2-year cycle, we're not going to have any legislative or taxation changes majorly that will happen before January 1st, 2026. So the Trump tax bill, basically the Jobs and Tax Act of 2017, is now going to run off through the end of 2025 as it was written, and we don't anticipate any changes to that at this point in time. There will be one new tax next year. We've talked about it a couple times. Is now part of the infrastructure bill or the Inflation Reduction Act. Anyway,
you
don't
can't
get me
say
started.
that with a straight face,
It's
David.
so hard to say that, but there will be a buyback tax starting next year on corporations that have over $1 billion in profits on stock buybacks, and that may affect the markets in a negative way short term. But yeah, there's the stalemate at least tells us we know the rules of the game, so to speak. Now, the other problem is it brings in some more potential things to be worried about with the market. So now the purse strings, of course, are controlled by the House of Representatives. And the Republicans are going to try to use that, I would assume, to negotiate some things in their favor. In other words, debt ceiling raises, things like that, budget reconciliation, passing any kind of spending bill. And already there is talk of new big spending bills coming out to try and help people fight inflation, ironically. Would anyone like to know what causes the inflation? But anyway, it's no major legislation will come about for the next 2 years for sure. And so at least there, like I said, it gives us runway to plan for business owner clients and for retirees.
Meanwhile, David, in the midst of all the doom and gloom stories out there, we did get what looked like some good news on jobs last month. Here's a CNBC headline: payrolls and wages blow past expectations, flying in the face of Fed rate hikes. Good news last week on jobs?
Well, it depends
last month, I should say.
Yeah, so it was a solid jobs number, but when you look into it, now, number one, this is, again, where good news is bad news, at least for the market. So the market turned and sold off. I think the Dow sold off about 350 points that morning, right when the story came out. So why? Why would it be bad news if we've got jobs growing? Well, because the wage inflation shown in there is still north of 5.1%. So wages are still going up, which is adding to inflationary pressures in our economy. So in other words, if businesses are continuing to have to pay more for the labor, for the workers, they have less room for profit, and that's going to be a bad thing going forward, okay? And, of course, it's creating more inflationary pressures because those costs, listen, when a company gives somebody a raise, they have to pass that cost on. I don't care if it's the drive-through you're going through to get a chicken sandwich or you're going to the hardware store. Those costs have to get passed on to the consumer, which means continued inflationary pressures in our economy for the foreseeable future. So as the market probably correctly interpreted that day, it means the Federal Reserve's got more work to do, right? And so they're not going to take their foot off the gas anywhere near as much as what people think. And this idea, the talking heads all over to you, oh, the Fed pivot, the Fed pivot. There's not going to be a Fed pivot. They're probably going to have to still raise about another 100 basis points before they're done this interest rate hiking cycle, And then they're going to pause. They're not just going to turn around, well, we're going to start taking rates right back down tomorrow. That's not the way this works. And if you study history, and you know I'm a big believer in that, and study economic data, history shows us that there will be a pause. And when they pause, it's usually really bad for the markets. And so you want to be prepared.
So in a cycle like this, it is really hard. The wages are always chasing, trying to catch up with and surpass inflation, but then the higher wages can feed inflation.
Yeah, it's a cycle. So, and that's why they have to raise
my
rates so
goodness.
far. They have to break the cycle, and to do that, you have to cause pain, which is why the recession is going to be deeper than most are thinking. I mean, you have Goldman Sachs out there saying no recession next year, and I would just tell you, I think they're wrong. Plainly, I believe you're going to see negative GDP between 2.5% and 3% both quarters 1 and 2 next year, and that's pretty ugly GDP.
Well, now that may be why there's another index that weighed in last month in November, and it was not as rosy. This is something we've referenced before, the University of Michigan Survey of Consumers, and the headline also from CNBC says, even with slower inflation, consumer sentiment weakened sharply in November, down 8.7% from the previous month's reading, well below the estimates. So consumer sentiment tracks more of what you've just been saying.
Yeah, and so the headline index fell 18.8% year over year. That's a pretty negative outlook on the economy, and that's telling you the consumer is starting to pull back. And we've talked about this recently. One of the bellwethers, sometimes when I'm doing the reviews with clients and we're doing their reviews, we're talking about what the economy looks like, and a great way to look at it is two big retailers everyone knows. Target, or Target, as my wife likes to call it, and Walmart, right? And we saw a very different numbers reported here this past month from those two big retailers. Walmart actually met their number, but sold less goods. Less things were actually scanned across the aisle, and that was due to the inflationary pressure. So they met their revenue goals and profit goals, but less items are sold. Target missed badly. And that's just showing you the consumer is stepping down. Target is known to be a little bit nicer store, probably has a little bit higher price on most of the items you buy. And so the consumer is stepping down and tightening the belt everywhere they can. And that's why we do not have such a rosy outlook right now, unfortunately, on our economy or even the markets and the equity markets, because you're going to see earnings get revised down here in the very near future.
You got my attention, David, when you sent me a message saying, here's a story from Dr. Doom. I thought, oh, is this a cartoon? Is this a comic book? So I open up this story from Zero Hedge, and the headline says, Rubini warns the mother of all economic crises looms. Who is Dr. Doom? What's his prediction, and do you agree?
So Dr. Doom is always known to put, let's just call it maybe a worst case scenario out. So he's a brilliant NYU professor, and Rubini is known as being, I was joking with you before we came on air this morning, is that he reminds me of like a character, like a villain character in the old Peter Sellers version of the Pink Panther movies back when I was a kid. But yeah, he's just telling you, listen, it's not very good data out there. So we're seeing the debt that the government and the consumer around the globe has taken on is getting to we're going to get to a breaking point where just a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had record savings because all those stimulus checks, people were being smart with the money, Chip. They were paying off their credit cards and sticking it in the savings account. They didn't actually need it. The government wasted and printed money. Again, why we have inflation is because all this money came out there. But now people stopped working, right? We had the Great Resignation a year ago. We talked about how almost 5 million people quit their job in November a year ago, and the dollars have run out, and now people are running up their credit cards to record levels of debt on their credit cards. We had the highest jump month over month in history on credit card debt. All this debt, public and private, is going to come to a head. And in European countries, people forget this, we had negative interest rates for a while. We went to zero basically here, but we didn't go negative. You went to negative, and now you're going positive. Completely flips the script. And again, we briefly talked about this. We're the only country that really has 30-year mortgages. And so there are people in England, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, all these people have to refinance their house payments, and that is going to crush the economy worldwide. So it's just ugly data any way you put it. And yeah, I would tell you, he's probably pretty accurate on what it looks like. Now, again, we don't want people to think, oh, doom and gloom. And I know I've been a little bit negative here lately, I would say. I'm certainly negative on the economy. But it doesn't mean you can't weather the storm. You need to have a plan so that you can, make a path forward on how you're going to survive this for your personal well-being with whatever assets and resources you have at your disposal. But I can tell you, we had Mike Schuettel on here just a couple weeks ago talking about pensions. There is a major cut in lump sum pension distributions right now because of this interest rate move, and people are going to lose dollars. So if you have a buyout opportunity from a company, don't hesitate. You need to look at these options because when interest rates go up, it recalculates what the pension earns and their expenses, and they may offer you a smaller lump sum than you anticipated. It could be as much as $100,000 to $150,000 difference. So there's just so much data to go through in here, and I know we don't have time, Chip, but yeah, not real happy with the economic data we're seeing laid out in front of us. But again, I just want people to know this is why we offer what's called a report card. This is where we're going to show you basically everything from the taxation that you're paying and what future taxation might look like for you and what you potentially might be able to save, but also how to do a real risk analysis on your portfolio and your resources, whether it's risk to any income sources you now have, or if you're worried about asset prices falling, whether it's hard assets like real estate and commodities, or stock market, mutual funds, your 401ks and IRAs. We can show you how to understand what it looks like for that going forward and what strategies and maneuvers you might want to implement to put yourself in a more comfortable position.
Well, see, and that's the key takeaway. Even if Dr. Doom is right, even if the mother of all economic crises looms and hits us in 2023, we have dozens of strategies, overlapping, interlocking strategies to mitigate the damage to help you weather the storm so you can come out of it the other side in great shape. But the first step is to get that complimentary report card, 402-369-7777. No charge, no obligation, comprehensive review of your entire financial situation. The report card, 402-369-7777. Up next, Retire Smart wants to be your one-stop shop for all your financial matters. That includes taxes. Learn more about our... Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. At Retire Smart, we are constantly innovating and evolving to better serve our clients. With that in mind, David, please introduce our special guest.
Thanks, Chip. Yeah, we've got our in-house accountant extraordinaire, although since you heard her on the air last, we have to call her by a different name because you got married. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
And your husband now, I have to call him that, is actually a pastor where I attend church.
Yep.
And I found out after you got married that I've been calling him by the wrong name all these years. He pronounces it very differently. So your new name now is Abigail McNaney.
There it is, yes.
All right. Well, congratulations, Miss McNaney, and congratulations to you, Mitch. You also had a birthday, so you've had a lot going on, right?
Yes,
So
it
this
has been
a whirlwind.
busy.
Very good.
Yeah.
You've been doing some testing, studying, all kinds of good stuff
Yeah.
going on. Are you ready for the holiday season here? You ready for Christmas?
I think so. I'm very excited. Getting gifts for my family is a little bit crazy. They all like very different things, but I think we're ready to rock and roll.
Very
After
nice.
a wedding and a birthday and all that craziness, I feel like I can handle anything.
Absolutely. Very cool. Very cool indeed. Well, for those of you listening, if you're not familiar with Abigail, or sometimes you'll hear me just call her Abby, she'll answer to either, thank
Yes.
goodness. But Abigail runs our Tax Smart division, and this is a proactive tax planning consulting firm. We also offer tax preparation, not to the public, but to our clients of Retire Smart as an additional service if they wish to use that. And but I want to talk really about the difference between those two things, between tax preparation, which is what 95% of Americans, when they go hire an accountant or a CPA for taxation issues, filing the returns, they are doing what's called tax preparation. They're preparing their returns and submitting their returns to Treasury and IRS, et cetera. What is the main difference, in your humble opinion, Abby, between tax preparation and tax planning?
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to distinguish between the two. So tax prep is, it's important to have someone who helps you, who knows what they're doing. The Internal Revenue Code can be hard to understand. But in the end...
You mean all 83,000 pages? Why wouldn't you be able to understand that?
It's a light read. All the dots connect together perfectly. It's beautiful. But for those of you who don't, I guess, maybe want to sit there and read all those pages, for tax prep, people just kind of are there to help you collect all of your financial data and then put that into your tax return, file it with the IRS. If they're qualified and maybe something comes up, they're there to communicate with the IRS for you. But the really cool thing about tax planning is that it's a lot more proactive. And so tax planners are able to analyze your entire financial situation. They take all of the elements of your individual or company that you may have, and they are able to work and make sure what I have kind of wrote down is the most tax efficient way. And so to me, that means that you're paying the lowest taxes allowable. You're not paying more than necessary. And so that's kind of what the difference is to me. It's just proactive.
Well,
and,
absolutely. And,
yeah.
and I think exactly. There's the old adage, hey, you're supposed to pay your fair share. I have no problem paying my fair share,
Yep.
but I want to do it in the circumstances and organized in a way that I believe is my fair share. And folks, the tax code, the IRC, which is the Internal Revenue Code, which is all this is based on, is actually written to lower the taxpayer's bill. In other words, if it wasn't, we would just have a flat tax, right? Hey, pay this
Yeah.
percent and we're done. It's actually written to incentivize you. So when you hear people out there, got some tax loophole, or you hear like the former president using tax loopholes, they're not loopholes. This is the law. This is the Congress has approved the legislation that puts this code in place, and then it's up to you, the general public who are filing these tax returns, to be proactive, as we're talking about, and find what incentives may be in there. And that's exactly what the tax code does. It gives you incentives for certain types of behavior. And if you're a business owner, there's an amazing amount of incentives in the tax code. If you own real estate, there's a ton of incentives in the tax code. Now, some are more complicated than others, but there's no loopholes. You're not doing tax evasion, right? Which is illegal, and this is what people go to prison and should for.
Yes.
But tax avoidance or proactive tax planning, so that you can sometimes choose to defer a tax. Of course, accountants love that. You guys are taught that, right? First 6 months of school, you love the word defer, defer, defer.
Yep.
Not always the best choice, but in some circumstances, deferring a tax could be a good thing. In other circumstances, proactively telling someone to go ahead and pay a tax today when you have a lower rate versus a higher rate tomorrow could be a good thing, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are plenty of different strategies. And just to go back, it's biblical. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and then keep what is yours, and be a good steward of that. So there's plenty of tax strategies in order to save your money so you can use it well. And so, I mean, it comes down to even your entity type. There's different retirement plans or retirement planning strategies that you can use, as well as what you said, reviewing your assets and real estate. What's the best way to handle all of those, wealth management when it comes to donor advised funds and qualified charitable distributions. And
well,
so,
I mean, you could bring up a great point there. There are folks that don't think they have a very complicated financial situation. They've kind of got themselves set up for retirement, and they're cruising along in retirement, but they're tithing to their church or giving to a local cause like Open Door Mission or something, but they're not getting any of the tax benefits that are allowed and incentivized. We incentivize you to help charities here in this country, and so why not take advantage of those? And you just mentioned what's called a QCD, or a qualified charitable distribution. Once you reach basically 70 and a half years of age, all your donations should be coming from your IRA, right?
Yeah. That's a phenomenal strategy, to be paying out your money, like you said, and getting those tax strategies, again, working tax efficiently.
And folks, when it comes to proactive tax planning, what Abigail focuses on, she works with a lot of entrepreneurs, the type of clients that, and if you're out there listening and you're a business owner with a growing business and you've got revenues that are growing and your tax bill is growing, most likely if you're successful in growing the company, you might want to have a sit down with someone like Abigail who can help you kind of do a proactive tax plan. And now when we're talking about proactive tax planning, especially for high income earners or business owners, those that are probably paying at least $75,000 a year in income taxes, we're not talking about just saving you taxes in year one or 1 year at a time, right? We're going to show them, and we do this with our retirees. We show people how to save taxes over the life of their retirement, over their lifetime. But for business owners, it can sometimes be $100,000 or $200,000 in just the next 2 or 3 years by understanding they're in the either wrong entity or setting up a side entity, understanding whether or not they should purchase the real estate, they operate their business. There's so many decisions that go into this, but no one gives people this proactive guide, if you will, and that's what Abigail does now. She focuses her time on consulting business owners, and she used to work, by the way, and this is one of the things I love when she came on board, and again, full disclosure, her father is the pastor at my church, so I probably can never get rid of Abigail, right?
Sorry.
But no, one of the things when we interviewed Abigail is Abigail was working for one of the big accounting firms, one of the top 8 size firms in the country, and she would sit down with CFOs of some pretty large organizations and look them right in the eye. Hey, I'm questioning some of these things you're doing here. Something's not not right. And so that's one of the things I loved when we brought her on board is she's not afraid to tell you like it is, so to speak. And so many businesses, it is estimated about 40% of all entrepreneurs are operating under just the wrong entity, right? S Corp versus C Corp or LLC, sole proprietor partnerships, et cetera. And they have no idea. And you ask them, hey, why'd you set up that way? I don't know. Someone said I should, you know? So listen, if you'd like to take advantage and have a consultation, the first of the year is going to be here before you know it. You can reach out to us here at Retire Smart, 402-369-7777, and set up a consultation in the first quarter to find out maybe what is possible. And now we've invested in Abigail, and we're sending her to all kinds of conferences, et cetera, to continue to expand on that awesome knowledge base she's brought to the table for us. So before we run out of time, though, we did actually briefly, I think, touch on it in the first segment there. We've created a year-end kind of tax guide that anybody can utilize. Just a couple of quick strategies you might want to implement. If you want to get that, don't forget to call for that. But Abigail, what would you say is your most favorite tax saving strategy thus far that you've been able to help or at least suggest to anybody? Yeah,
I think, well, for individuals, Tax Smart really... not Tax Smart, Retire Smart and Tax Smart loves. One is just the Roth strategies and saving totally on taxes for retirees. I think that's a huge one. Just seeing that transform retirement for individuals is fantastic.
You can do Roth conversions. Now, we actually call it SRI around here. In fact, we actually got a federal trademark, and that stands for Strategic Roth Integration. But you can move money from your IRA or 401k to a Roth IRA and pay a lower tax rate today than a rate in the future. And depending on what your guaranteed income sources are, that is a guaranteed tax savings because we know taxes are going up in 3 years and 3 weeks, right?
Yep, correct. Yeah.
So listen, you don't want to keep punting the ball down. Time is of the essence. You're running the clock out here on this year, and there's a couple things you can do on your own, but you need to find out what you need to do and do it now. So don't hesitate to call, but if you want to sit on with a consultation with Abigail, you can give us a call again, 402-369-7777. We are out of time for this segment, Abigail. I hope you have a blessed Christmas. I know I'll see you around the office. We're getting so busy I can't see everybody every day anymore, but hey, have a blessed and Merry Christmas. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Chip, what do we got next?
Up next, you have questions. David Brooks has answers. Q&A is next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Into the Q&A we go. David, the first question is about health care. I've heard you say that the M in a SMART plan covers medical and other health expenses, but what does that mean? Without a magic crystal ball showing how long I will live and what condition my health will be, how can you determine how much I will need in retirement for health costs? David, how do you do it? Okay,
so, there's some actuarial data that we have our access to, and people don't really like to know how accurate some of this actuarial data is. So who gives us this data? Life insurance companies. So the biggest management companies of risk globally are insurance companies. That's what they do. They mitigate risk. And so one of the key areas they're going to do that was the product like life insurance. And there's all different versions how life insurance works, but the insurance company is not going to lose money, right? So when you buy life insurance, basically you are giving them a premium, you're paying money, and they're going to pay out a death benefit when you're no longer here. And actuarially, unfortunately, if you were to pass away earlier, you got a pretty good deal, at least on the return, on your
investment. Didn't pay much in premiums, and they paid off the death benefit.
But on the aggregate, they don't lose money. As I said, they know based on ethnicity, gender, age, previous conditions, health factors, your parents' longevity, and geography where you live, how accurate they can get this down into when you may or may not be here within just a couple of months, believe it or not. Now, obviously, there's outliers, but when you do this times, millions and millions and millions of people, that's how they can make this bet, if you will, and offer to protect your services. But to get to the question at hand, when it comes to healthcare costs, using that same data, we can kind of tell you what it looks like for most people, depending on how old you are. If you're married, married people live longer, by the way, so that's one caveat, just so you know. And then what kind of health expenses you're going to have. According to Fidelity, it's for a married couple turning 65, and this was actually in 2019, it's a little over $300,000 out of pocket for all the M part in retirement. And that does not include long-term care, something I'm to deal with my mom right now. We're going through the process of trying to get her into a facility. Unfortunately, as I talk about my mom here, she's got dementia now, and so we'll end up most likely moving into a facility sooner rather than later. But those are not cheap facilities, and that's not included in that Fidelity experiment. So what we do is we kind of based on what the client's information they give us, and of course, just like a computer, right? Data in, data out. There's no errors. It's how good is the data we're working from. So when a client kind of gives us and lets us know where they stand, and this is why we tell people, as a fiduciary, we're not going to sugarcoat. We're going to tell you what you need to hear, but we're going to need to ask everything. And I always tell people, listen, when you come in for your annual reviews, I'm always asking, how you feeling? How you doing? It's not a rhetorical question. I need to know. And I mean, I can just tell you recently, I had a client that didn't want to disclose to me something we have to deal with all the time, a cancer diagnosis. And the wife was a little upset and at the very end of the meeting, but it changed. Literally, we had to extend the meeting 30 minutes because there are a couple things we had to do right then and there for tax planning issues. So it's so important. But to answer the question, yeah, we don't have the crystal ball, but we have a lot of great data that tells us what the numbers most likely will be, and then we want to plan accordingly. And of course, the client makes the ultimate decision on how they want to cover their risks associated with healthcare, and that'd be a great person to come to, like the Medicare classes. Of course, Medicare season just ended basically this past week, but we go through a lot of that data, and next year we look to have it like an advanced healthcare class, which will go into all the healthcare factors, including long-term care, that you're going to face as a retiree and how you can mitigate or at least self-insure, all those things, just understanding what and where those expenses are coming from.
So there are a lot of data points out there that allow you to work up a solid analysis
Absolutely.
of a person's healthcare needs. But you don't withhold it. A financial advisor, we're not only professionals, but we're fiduciaries looking out for your best interests at Retire Smart. But for goodness sake, don't hold back. If you've got cancer, you got to tell us.
It's the second biggest expense. The M is the second biggest expense the average retiree is going to face. Yet I can tell you from my experience in doing this for several decades, and I got friends at just about every firm you can name, right? A lot of industry friends. Most of them never really address or get to the healthcare costs. That's not for me. They just work on the investments. And that's the difference too, is you might just have an investment guy or gal, or do you want a real planner? That's it's a choice people have to make, obviously. But it's a critical piece especially when it comes to retirement planning.
Next question, David, is about 401ks. I heard a financial advisor say 401k auto portability helps stop leakage, but I didn't hear the whole conversation. So my questions are: what is 401k leakage? What is auto portability? And how does auto portability help stop leakage? David, can you break that down for us?
So basically, auto portability is where your 401k would just automatically follow you. And there is, some groundwork being laid for legislation to have this. In other words, if you work for employer ABC for 5 years and then take an offer from XYZ company, a competitor, and decide to move, your 401k would automatically just follow you. You wouldn't have to proactively go find it. And so the leakage they're talking about is if you leave it behind, a lot of people don't pay attention to the fees in there. You're no longer getting the match from the company you used to work for. Obviously, they're not going to kick any money in there. And you don't really have anybody guiding you typically on those plans. Now, you may be getting some advice inside the plan, but most of the time, ex-employees are not going to be part of the annual meetings on the 401ks or where they're going over any new enhancements. So your money's just left adrift out there. And is it allocated correctly? Is it set up for you in the way that you thought it was? Do you really want the money still there? And so now I'm not a big proponent of this auto portability, by the way. But I am a big proponent of you understanding your old 401ks. You do have choices and options, and you need to determine what the best choice is. So you could roll that into an individual retirement account, an IRA. Now, it may or may not be the right choice based on expenses and fees, etc. 401ks have gotten much cheaper lately, so where they used to be one of the most high expense and fee kind of financial products out there, they're coming to the lower side, and there's been a lot of pressure from Congress to get those fees down. And so, but if you roll it to an IRA, if you hire a professional like someone here at Retire Smart, you would pay some sort of fee there. You could roll it to a Vanguard or free or no fee type of IRA. So expenses are certainly a critical part. But the key difference, Chip, is in a lot of 401ks, there's nowhere to hide. In other words, there's very few choices in most of these 401ks. They've all migrated to these target date funds. So some of these 401ks only have 8 to 15 choices, where if you had an individual IRA, you've got the whole world as your oyster of what you can invest in. I mean, you could even invest in real estate if you wanted to, or, all kinds of things. So, I mean, I don't have time to go into that today, but so the idea behind this is that leakage, or the money just sitting there not being actively and proactively managed, is what they're talking about. And so my suggestion is meet with a professional and find out and determine if maybe using an IRA, whether it's professionally managed or not, might be a better solution for you, and what is your time horizon and goals, et cetera. There's a couple other key points, though, Chip. If you're over 55, this is missed a lot by financial advisors, by the way, missed a lot. If you're over 55, and you leave an employer and are semi-retired or not even retired, you don't have to pay a 10% penalty if you take money out of that. It's taxable if you take it. But if you roll it to an IRA and then needed to access those funds, you'd have to pay tax on it plus a 10% premature penalty until you're 59 and a half. So again, there's so many things that go into this. And this is why you want a planner, not just an investment guy or gal, right?
Okay, because you surprised me when you said, I'm not a fan of auto portability. Well, to me, wow, that sounds good. Keep the money automatically moving with you. But what you're saying is it takes more than that. You could still not be getting the maximum advantage even with auto portability.
Correct, because
you need to have a professional look at all the angles.
Well, you're going to go from one plan that probably has limited choices, and most likely, again, not all of them, some of them offer wide open brokerage, but most of them offer a very limited slide deck, if you will, of 5 to 15 choices, what have you. So you're going to have such limited options. I just believe I like to have options. I like to have, be able to plan for multiple strategies, et cetera. And unfortunately, most 401ks don't allow that, in my humble opinion.
Let's squeeze one more in, David, as we approach the end of the calendar year and the tax year. This is about tax refunds. I read an article in CNBC saying tax refunds may be smaller in 2023. Does that affect how you handle a client's portfolio?
It does not, because we manage what we think the tax bill will be in our proactive process. Like when clients come in, we ask for the tax return every year, and then with our software, we have proprietary software that we've developed that we will actually show you where we think you are and what your tax bill will be literally for next year. And then we agree on how you should be setting up your withholdings, or if we're going to do withholdings from things like Roth conversions, other strategies we may implement. But where this it can be a problem is for a lot of our listeners out there is a lot of people have this misnomer, Chip, that if they get a bigger refund, they paid less in taxes. It's just the difference. You have to pay the tax bill, right? You're an X in income and you pay Y in taxes. That's your tax bill. Now, if you had enough withheld, you'll get a refund. If you over withheld, but folks, all that meant was you gave the government...
You paid too much.
Yeah, you gave the government an interest-free loan.
I'm the Grinch on refunds. What? That means I paid too much all year to Uncle Sam.
So we don't want you to give the government interest-free loan. We don't. But again, some people have a struggle with budgeting, and this is their automatic savings plan. So they over withhold on purpose, and they get a couple $1,000s, and that's their vacation account or whatever. And if you have no discipline, maybe that's not the worst thing. But you could have had that money deposited in an account, and today you can actually earn interest. It's not zero interest anymore. So why would you give the government an interest-free loan? There's a lot to unpack there, but I know we're out of time.
We are out of time for Q&A this week, David. But if people would like to call us for a no-charge, no-obligation phone conversation with one of our licensed financial advisors, how many openings do we have?
We actually got 12 available this week. Moved the calendar around and actually made the advisor step up to give some more appointment time, because we know year-end pressures here and folks really need to take heed. So please, these do fill up quickly, folks. Do not hesitate. Take advantage. Just get your most pressing question answered.
15-minute phone conference with one of our advisors. 402-369-7777. Again, no charge, no obligation. You can get a question answered about your retirement. 402-369-7777. Up next, a local news story broke recently that evoked memories of the scandalous collapses of Commonwealth Savings in Lincoln and Franklin Credit Union in Omaha. We'll tell you about it next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Well, David, here's the headline from Channel 10 in Lincoln, KILN. Target of loan fraud investigation, was building multi-million-dollar residential complex. It has people talking about the bizarre suicide of David Hunter of State Title Services in 2007. And if you're my vintage or older, you can remember back in the 1980s, Commonwealth Savings in Lincoln, Franklin Credit Union in Omaha. What happened here, David?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to go back. I remember in high school, we actually were doing, we did our own Congress, if you will, in our government class my senior year, and we had Grand Redmond come through, and that was basically trying to bail out the savings and loans all across the country that were disappearing. You remember the scandal? It cost the government, well, back then, billions of dollars. Today, it would have been in the trillions of dollars. But yeah, this is not the kind of story you want to see, especially right here in our backyard. But, here we go. Somebody he's passed away, and there's an alleged fraud here of over $30 million. And that's pretty scary that, the Department of Banking now has basically found out there's between $30 and $50 million of fraudulent loans made by more than 20 banks here across the state. That's a little scary. That's what we call contagion problem here is if they got away with it and most industries are the good old boy network, so to speak. So one banker calls the other one, yeah, he's a good guy, loan him some money, and it just keeps on spilling out. And so this, just like the FTX story, right, the crypto thing falling down, I think will continue to have ripple effects and further go down the pipeline until we find out what really happened here. But this was what did you call it? The barn-dominium?
Barn-dominium. He called his, I don't know what to call it, recreation facility that was on part of the complex. Yeah, a pool inside it, I think, and a basketball court. I can't remember what else.
So, there's dozens of estate claims that now are going against the estate, and there's no funds to pay this, so it's going to look pretty bad. And of course, this story, I think we can probably circle back to it and uncover it here in the future as we find out all the unfortunate news that comes out of this. It's not a happy ending.
We'll keep an eye on that one. Aaron Marshbanks was the deceased there at the center of it all. We'll keep an eye on that as it unfolds. David, out to California we go. It seemed like for a while there, almost every week, something bizarre. It's been kind of quiet out of California, but then comes this Zero Hedge headline: California mulls ban on all gas and diesel truck fleets. And the trucking industry is furious because, they want to get rid of gasoline and diesel, but there's no feasible alternative.
Okay. Listen, I understand people want to be a good steward of the environment, but for 70 years now, we've been told that doom and gloom would come within 10 years if we don't change CO2 emissions, et cetera. And obviously none of that data has ever come to fruition. They are now trying to say the plan would mandate that all trucks operating around the railways and the ports where most of these goods and services come in have to be zero emission vehicles, Chip, by 2024. That's 14 months away. Not even. That's crazy. And then all the diesel trucks would, of course, have to be phased out, as we talked about earlier, by 2035. So basically in a decade. There is no way you would have the infrastructure to even build the fleet, the vehicles to move the goods and services, let alone have the energy grid to support them. They're already telling people that drive EV vehicles, Teslas and the like, you can only charge every other day with the current infrastructure that is in place. And this is just, it's lunacy. And they're pandering, obviously, to those that think this is really important, and I get that. But again, the economic damage that this would cause, I don't think you can even calculate it. It would be in the trillions. And you got to remember, prior to COVID, folks, the state of California was the 5th biggest economy in the world by itself. It is not today. And this would further damage them. And, of course, their leaders out there, the governor, I think he has aspirations of running for another office. And I think this is just pandering to his base, if you will, Newsom, trying to set himself up. But the reality is this would never happen. And you got the various associations of the trucking companies saying, look, this is impossible. Even if we wanted to go along and do it, you show us how it's possible, and it's just not. So, but this would be economic doom and gloom for California and towns like Long Beach, where, that's a major, major port here for goods and services coming in from Asia into the U.S., would be decimated. And that's a lot of jobs that would go away. And anyway, I think jobs are going away in a fast way anyway.
California's already hemorrhaging people and businesses. Boy.
Well, and again, so the problem is, and so there's a movement that's been around for a while now, and it got a lot of steam here recently, but it's turned out that it's just created additional expenses to investing. It's called ESG, and so this is environmentally and socially conscionable investing, right? And the idea is to help have a greener planet and socially conscionable ideas, and you're seeing backlash from this all over the country now, and so and trust me, even our own SEC is pushing, hey, what's your ESG score on the 401ks, like we talked about? And some people don't want their money invested in those type of things, and some do, and I understand that, but it just adds additional expense, which means less return for the actual investor, which is what I care about. I want the retiree to get the maximum efficiency of their money.
Well, that takes us right into the next story on our list here. So ESG, environment, social, and governance policy issues. That's what's at issue here. And the CNBC headline reads, activist investor calls for BlackRock CEO Fink to step down over ESG hypocrisy. And that's a noun. The BlackRock CEO Fink is Larry Fink. They're not calling him a Fink, although they are calling him a Fink. I guess they're upset about ESG. So, David, if I understand it, the activist investor wants more ESG, and Larry Fink is saying buzz off.
Yeah, now BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world, trillions of dollars under management. And the activist coming up here is a company called Bluebell. I believe they're based out of London, and they basically they're not a huge asset manager. Actually, we advise on more dollars than they do, but they have about 250 million assets under management, at least it says, and of that they own a small stake in BlackRock. But they and the guy got some play on CNBC and videos going around on YouTube and whatnot, calling this out, saying, listen, we want you to focus on the return for our investors, not on these other issues, because that's what our and again, as a fiduciary, so I'm going to invest money. My job is to get you the most efficient return, right? To help you with a risk-adjusted return to help you accomplish your goals. And basically, they told him to brush off, basically. And now, what's interesting is this is just the start of the backlash. Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, did the same thing, and the state of Florida has already pulled over $1 billion out of BlackRock invested funds from their pension plans because of this very issue, and they don't believe they're doing the shareholders justice. And you're seeing this, and I mean, this is just a theme we're seeing right now. And obviously, I know some folks lean to the left, but the expression go woke, if you will, or what have you, go broke is what's been trending, because Disney is a great example of that, and they recently had to fire their CEO because they went in a direction so far from the consumer base, their stock plummeted and they lost over $140 billion of market value. And the stock has gotten just hammered basically because they're not focused on what the shareholder really wants them to be focused on. Grow the company, provide a good service for your consumer to purchase, and then we make money off of that, and that's great. And there's no problem with stakeholder capitalism. In other words, you want to do good. In fact, I just got back from a conference, and a gentleman named Jeff Henderson spoke, and this gentleman worked for the Atlanta Braves, he worked for Chick-fil-A, and he worked for North Point Church, which is Andy Stanley's church in the Atlanta area, one of the largest churches in the U.S., and he's been about growth, and he's got basically a book called FOR, F-O-R, that talks about what do you stand for, right? And it was a really impactful speech that he gave at this conference, but he's talking about there's nothing wrong with being for something, but you must do it profitably, and you should focus on your core mission of whatever goods and services you sell, not outside issues, and then in the end, you'll ultimately deliver what your shareholder wants and what your consumer wants. And look, if you're a bad company and you're just doing bad for the world, and then people will find out, right? That's how capitalism works, Chip, and they'll take their dollars and they'll walk down the street and they'll buy somebody else's goods or services. So I don't think you need to mandate goodness. People can find this out on their own. But anyway, that's how capitalism works. I'm much more Friedman-like than these guys. These Keynesian economics are a joke, in my opinion, because for 40 years of their theories, all you've seen is the world awash in debt, as we talked about earlier, with no success. We have not made the world better with that debt. The only thing that's lifted people out of poverty, and we have thousands of years to prove it, is capitalism. It's saved more lives than anything. And countries that go socialist, Marxist, communist, millions and millions of people unfortunately perish. And we're still seeing that on the globe today, which is sad in 2023 with the ability to communicate. But now we're such a divisive nation, you can't get news anymore. You get editorial to the left or editorial to the right, and you have to make up your own mind.
Well, give me Milton Friedman every time. All right, so let's take stock of what's on the menu for you this week. We've got that year-end checklist, 402-369-7777. And then, of course, the inflation guide. Inflation's not going away anytime soon. Would you like a 15-minute phone conference with one of our licensed advisors? That's no charge, no obligation. Or take the plunge and get the report card, the complimentary review of your entire financial situation. For any and all of those, 402-369-7777. 402-369-7777. David, bring us home.
Hey, it was my wife's birthday this week. I wished her a very happy birthday, and I want you to have a happy New Year and a Merry Christmas. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. For David Brooks and the entire team at Retire Smart, have a great week.